Poor boy's dad sick, wife fled with cash. Suddenly a beautiful CEO said, "You're heir to richest man." Daniel Thompson gripped a torn piece of paper in his hands, his body trembling inside a near-empty apartment on Detroit's East Jefferson Avenue. His wife Jessica was gone, her closet stripped bare, their shared bank account emptied. The note she left behind cut deeper than the missing money. "I can't do this anymore. I deserve better than this life." That money had been for his father's surgery, the only chance at saving Robert, who lay weak and speechless in the next room after a massive stroke. For days Daniel worked himself to exhaustion, loading trucks at dawn, selling plasma at night, but the mountain of hospital bills only grew taller. His eyes carried the fatigue of someone cornered with no way out. 3 days later, his legs carried him to Detroit's Renaissance Center, a place he often wandered when searching for answers he couldn't find. While seated on a cold marble bench, staring at the Detroit River, a woman in a navy suit walked straight toward him. Her voice was steady, her words unbelievable. "You're worth $12 billion. How did a warehouse worker become heir to one of America's greatest fortunes?" Stay with us and subscribe. This story has only just begun. Let's begin. Daniel Thompson's alarm buzzed at 4:30 every morning. By 5 a.m., he was already standing at the bus stop on East Jefferson Avenue, his breath clouding in the frigid Detroit air. The ride to Eastern Market felt endless, yet he barely noticed anymore. His work boots carried the memory of yesterday's sweat, and his back ached from lifting crates for hours on end. At 28, he was already living like a man twice his age, but there was no choice. Every dollar mattered. Inside the cavernous warehouse, Daniel spent 12-hour shifts heaving boxes into semi-trailers bound for grocery stores and restaurants across the Midwest. By the time he returned home, his shirt was soaked through, his hands blistered, his eyes heavy. But rest never came. His father, Robert, needed constant care. The stroke had left half his body stiff and unresponsive, his speech slurred, his independence stripped away. Each evening, Daniel prepared meals, managed medications, and guided his father through slow, painful exercises in their cramped living room. Medical bills arrived like clockwork, stamped in red, demanding payment. The cost of physical therapy at Henry Ford Hospital alone was more than Daniel's monthly paycheck. Added to that were consultations, specialist visits, and prescriptions stacked across the counter. It was a race he could never win, but he kept running because his father's life depended on it. Jessica, his wife of 3 years, had once shared the burden willingly. She had promised him love through difficulty, through sacrifice, through whatever storms might come. At first, she worked alongside him to manage expenses, her receptionist job downtown bringing in just enough to cover groceries. But as the months wore on, her patience wore thin. Her evenings no longer ended at home. The law firm where she worked was filled with professionals dressed in tailored suits, carrying themselves with confidence Daniel had never known. Jessica began to stay late, first claiming extra hours, then offering no explanation at all. Their conversations turned sharp, filled with arguments about money, responsibility, and the future they once dreamed about but could no longer see. Daniel tried to hold them together. He bought small flowers from a market stall when he could, left notes for her in the mornings, reminded her of the life they were fighting for. But Jessica had already checked out, her heart drifting toward someone else. Daniel never knew the details of her affair, only that her time at the office became her escape. The breaking point came on a February morning, so cold the windows of their apartment froze over. Daniel returned from a night shift at the warehouse, his body sore, only to be met by silence. The closet stood empty, the jewelry box was gone, and the bank app on his cracked phone showed a balance of 0. On the kitchen table lay the note that ended it all. Her handwriting was rushed, her words final. "I can't do this anymore. I deserve better than this life." The money she took wasn't just savings. It was the fund for Robert's surgery. The operation doctors said could not wait. Without it, the odds of his father's recovery dropped dangerously low. Daniel stared at the note until his vision blurred. In that moment, he felt stripped of everything, his partner, his stability, his hope. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in, the faint hum of his father's medical equipment in the next room reminding him that there was no time to collapse. He had to find another way. So he pushed harder. He begged for weekend shifts at Eastern Market, hauling equipment for vendors before dawn. He sold plasma twice a week at a clinic in Corktown, walking past the ruins of old Tiger Stadium where his father had once cheered with him from the stands. He applied for loans at banks stretching from downtown Detroit to Bloomfield Hills, sitting across from polished managers who skimmed his forms before shaking their heads. His credit was acceptable, but his income was too low. He was a risk. Even the smallest relief seemed out of reach. Social programs promised help, but required months of paperwork. Friends and extended family offered what they could, but they too were struggling in a city still clawing its way back from economic collapse. Daniel's body showed the toll. He shed weight rapidly, his face hollowing out, his skin pale beneath the dim apartment lights. Headaches throbbed behind his eyes, and his hands trembled as he jotted calculations late into the night, searching for a solution that never appeared. Each day ended the same. Sitting beside his father, adjusting pillows, guiding stiff limbs, pretending his own exhaustion didn't exist. Robert, though weakened, noticed. His voice was broken, words slow and uneven, but his concern cut through. "You, killing yourself, son," he whispered one evening as Daniel helped him stretch his arm. "Strong, but not foolish. Find another way." Daniel nodded but said nothing. There was no other way. The man who had raised him, who had taken him to baseball games, who had worked decades at the Ford Rouge factory to provide a modest but steady life, was slipping away. And Daniel, no matter how hard he tried, was powerless to stop it. Daniel often wandered the cavernous halls of Detroit's Renaissance Center when he felt cornered by life. The mirrored walls and marble floors were nothing like his worn apartment, but the building's sheer size gave him space to breathe. From benches overlooking the Detroit River, he would watch ships push through the current, their slow passage across the water strangely calming. On a gray Thursday afternoon, he sat there again, clutching a rejection letter from a loan office. His shoulders sagged, his eyes heavy from days without sleep. Around him, professionals in pressed suits hurried to meetings, their voices crisp, their laughter confident. Daniel felt invisible, another man in scuffed boots and a frayed jacket, carrying problems no one cared about. That was when he noticed her. A woman walked across the polished floor with a steady rhythm, her heels clicking against the tile. She wasn't wandering. She wasn't rushing. She was moving toward him with purpose. She stopped directly in front of him. Her navy suit was sharp, her dark hair neatly pulled back, her expression calm but commanding. She looked as though she belonged to a different world altogether, one of wealth and certainty. "Daniel Thompson?" Her voice was low but firm. He blinked, uncertain whether to answer. "Yes. Do I know you?" "My name is Victoria Sterling," she replied, offering her hand with quiet confidence. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I've been looking for you." Daniel stared at her, unsure if he should laugh or walk away. Sterling Enterprises was one of the largest companies in the country. He'd seen their name in newspapers, attached to skyscrapers, even printed across real estate projects in downtown Detroit. The thought that its leader was standing before him felt absurd. "I think you've got the wrong man," he said finally, standing to leave. "I'm nobody. Just a warehouse worker." Victoria's gaze didn't waver. "You are more than that, Mr. Thompson. You are the rightful heir to one of the greatest fortunes in America." Daniel froze, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Excuse me. You are the grandson of Alexander Sterling, founder of Sterling Enterprises," she said. "Your inheritance is estimated at $12 billion. The word struck him like a blow. For a moment, all he could do was stare, his mind refusing to accept what he had heard. He wanted to believe it was a cruel joke or some elaborate scam. He shook his head. "That's impossible. My grandfather was Frank Thompson. He worked in a steel mill. He wasn't some billionaire." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Frank Thompson was your step-grandfather. A good man who raised your father as his own. But your biological grandfather was Alexander Sterling. Your grandmother Helen left him more than 30 years ago, when she was pregnant with your father. She wanted a life free from the chaos of Alexander's empire. She changed her name, disappeared, and raised her son away from wealth. Daniel frowned, unwilling to accept this stranger's story. This is insane. If this were true, why would you be telling me here, in the middle of a lobby? Why not send a lawyer or a letter, or something that makes sense? Because I needed to see you, Victoria answered simply. She reached into a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. And because I knew you wouldn't believe me without proof. He hesitated before taking the folder. Inside were birth certificates, legal documents, and photographs. One page bore his father's name, Robert Thompson, next to Alexander Sterling's in clear black type. Another contained results from a DNA test comparing Daniel's blood sample from a routine hospital visit with genetic material held in Sterling family archives. The match was undeniable. Daniel's hands shook as he turned the pages. There were photos of Alexander Sterling himself, a tall, silver-haired man with sharp features and eyes uncannily similar to his father's. The resemblance was undeniable, and it tightened something deep in Daniel's chest. He closed the folder, pressing it against his lap, as though it might disappear if he let go. Why now? Why me? Because Alexander Sterling searched for you until the day he died, Victoria said quietly. When he passed, his will included instructions. The entire Sterling fortune was to be held in trust until his true heir could be found. That heir is you. Daniel let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. This has to be a mistake. I can't even pay for my father's surgery, and you're telling me I'm worth billions? No one just walks up to a man like me and says that. Victoria's tone stayed even, her eyes fixed on his. I know it's difficult to accept, but everything you need to see is in that folder. You are Alexander Sterling's grandson. The company, the legacy, the resources, they belong to you. The marble bench beneath him suddenly felt unsteady. He looked at the glass towers around him, the wealth moving past in tailored suits, and for the first time wondered if he was somehow part of that world. He didn't know whether to feel anger, disbelief, or hope. Victoria straightened, her posture still commanding yet not unkind. You don't have to take my word for it, Daniel. We'll go through this step by step. But know this, your life is about to change forever. Daniel stared back at her, the folder heavy in his hands. He had no reason to trust her, yet something about her steady presence cut through his doubts. For the first time since Jessica had left, the weight on his shoulders shifted, replaced by a question too large to ignore. Could she be telling the truth? Daniel followed Victoria into the elevator, the folder of documents still clutched in his hands. The car glided upward in near silence until the doors opened on the 45th floor. What greeted him was unlike anything he had ever seen. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, offering an uninterrupted view of the Detroit River and the Ambassador Bridge that connected Michigan to Canada. Sunlight reflected off the water, casting the office in a glow that made the room feel like it sat above the entire city. Polished oak tables, chrome fixtures, and art worth more than Daniel's entire apartment filled the space. Every detail announced wealth and precision. This, Victoria said as she gestured toward the view, was Alexander Sterling's world. He built everything you see here from the ground up. Daniel stepped to the window, staring at the city that had defined his struggles. Down below, warehouses and factories looked small, almost toy-like, compared to the towers around him. He thought of his 5 a.m. shifts, his father's fragile state, Jessica's betrayal. It felt impossible that any of this could be tied to his name. Victoria led him deeper into the office, where portraits lined one wall. The largest was of Alexander Sterling himself. Daniel paused, his chest tightening as he studied the sharp eyes and firm jawline that mirrored features in his own father. Alexander was born in Flint, Victoria began, the son of a mechanic. He started repairing automotive parts in a small garage. By the time he was 30, he had contracts with major car companies. From there, he expanded into manufacturing, technology, energy, and real estate. What began as a corner garage became a $12 billion empire. Her voice carried both admiration and a hint of reverence. She motioned toward the skyline beyond the glass. Every high-rise project in this city, every major redevelopment in the last 50 years, has his mark on it. Daniel turned from the portrait, shaking his head. If this man was so powerful, why would my grandmother leave him? Why would my father grow up in poverty? Victoria took a measured breath before answering. Because Helen Sterling was young, frightened, and alone. She was pregnant with your father when she made her decision. Alexander was already consumed by the demands of his empire. Helen feared her child would inherit not only his wealth, but the coldness that came with it. She fled, taking a different name, and chose a modest life with Frank Thompson, the man you knew as your grandfather. Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of his grandmother, who had died years earlier. She had lived in a small house with peeling paint and creaky floors, working as a seamstress until her hands could no longer thread a needle. He had never understood why her life seemed marked by quiet sacrifice. Now the truth pressed heavily on him. "She never told my father?" he asked quietly. "She carried that secret until her last breath," Victoria replied. But Alexander never stopped searching. He employed investigators for decades. Each lead ended in disappointment. He died still hoping to find his family. In his will, he left strict instructions. The fortune would remain untouched until his heir was found. Daniel tried to steady himself. "And that's where you come in." Victoria nodded. 5 years ago, I took over as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I made it my mission to finish what Alexander started. Your father's medical records, an overlooked file in a private investigator's archive, even DNA collected during a hospital visit. Piece by piece, the trail pointed here. To you. He sank into a leather chair, the weight of her words pressing down. For years, he had scraped by with nothing. Every dollar counted, every decision measured against survival. Now, this woman was telling him his bloodline tied him to skyscrapers and fortunes beyond comprehension. "You expect me to believe that my whole life has been a mistake? That my father broke his back working jobs he never should have needed? I don't expect you to accept it overnight," Victoria said gently. "I only ask that you see the truth in front of you. Your grandfather tried to find you. He wanted you to inherit not just his wealth, but his responsibility." Daniel looked again at Alexander's portrait, the resemblance unmistakable. His pulse quickened, torn between disbelief and a strange, reluctant recognition. Victoria placed her hand on the folder he still gripped. "This is only the beginning, Daniel. The documents prove your connection, but what matters now is what you will do with it. The empire your grandfather built is waiting for its rightful heir. That heir is you." For a long moment, the office was silent except for the distant hum of the city below. Daniel felt suspended between two lives, the one defined by warehouses and debt, and the one Victoria claimed was his birthright. He exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the horizon beyond the glass. The Detroit he thought he knew was no longer the same. The first proof of Daniel's new identity came not in boardrooms or balance sheets, but in an ambulance. Within 24 hours of his meeting with Victoria, his father Robert was lifted into a private medical transport bound for the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. For months, Daniel had begged for help, filled out forms, pleaded with insurance companies, only to be denied. Now specialists who normally had year-long waiting lists stood ready the moment Robert arrived. Daniel watched from the hospital window as his father was wheeled inside, doctors already preparing advanced scans and treatments that he never thought possible. The stroke had left Robert partially paralyzed, his speech slurred, his strength diminished. Yet the Mayo team spoke with calm certainty about recovery, about progress, about a future Daniel had nearly given up on. The irony wasn't lost on him. His biological grandfather, a man he had never met, was paying for the life of the stepfather who had raised him in poverty. It felt like a cruel joke and a miracle in the same breath. During the long days in Minnesota, Victoria visited regularly. She brought updates from Sterling Enterprises, real estate projects spanning from Detroit to Dubai, technology startups shaping industries, shipping fleets, energy contracts, even art collections stored in climate-controlled vaults. She explained that as heir, Daniel now had access to board meetings, financial reports, and decisions that moved markets. He listened, but often his mind drifted back to the small kitchen table where Robert had once helped him with math homework, or the broken-down Ford pickup they had nursed through winters. The gap between those memories and the world he was being pulled into left him restless. At night, in the quiet of his hotel room near the clinic, the weight of it all pressed on him. Anger simmered at the thought of secrets kept, that his grandmother had hidden the truth, that his father had suffered without knowing help existed. Guilt gnawed at him, too. He wondered if he deserved any of this, when the man who raised him had worked himself to exhaustion for pennies. One evening, Victoria found him pacing the hallway. "You don't look like someone who just inherited billions," she said gently. Daniel stopped, hands clenched at his sides. "Do you know how insane this feels? My dad nearly died because we couldn't afford a hospital bill, and all this time, we were connected to the kind of money that could have changed everything." Victoria didn't argue. "It's unfair. But the truth is, you weren't lost because no one cared. You were lost because your grandmother made a choice she thought would protect her child. Alexander searched for you. He tried, but fate had its own timing." Her words didn't erase the bitterness, but they steadied him. Daniel knew that railing against the past wouldn't change it. His father needed him in the present, and for the first time, he had the power to provide more than hope. When Robert began regaining mobility in his left arm, Daniel sat at his bedside, tears blurring his vision. His father squeezed his hand weakly, and Daniel realized this recovery, this second chance, was being paid for by a man he had never met. The empire Alexander Sterling built was healing the only father he had ever known. The contrast haunted him. He could still feel the calluses on his palms from lifting crates at the warehouse. He remembered donating plasma for grocery money. Those struggles hadn't vanished. They were carved into him. But standing in the Sterling offices weeks later, reviewing holdings worth billions, he knew he could no longer see himself as only the poor man from Detroit. Victoria introduced him to senior executives, each treating him with deference, but Daniel carried an unease. He didn't want to be a figurehead, nor a spoiled heir. He wanted to understand, to earn respect in a world that now bowed to his last name. For every private jet, every corporate suite, every luxury car at his disposal, Daniel thought of Robert's recovery, of neighbors back home who were still trapped in the same cycle of poverty he had just escaped. The transformation of his life was undeniable, yet it left him with a deeper question. What was he meant to do with it? The story of Detroit's warehouse worker who had suddenly inherited one of the nation's largest fortunes spread faster than wildfire. Within days, local news outlets picked it up. The Detroit Free Press ran a feature. From loading docks to billions, local man named Sol Sterling heir. Television crews camped outside Sterling Enterprises headquarters, and Daniel's face appeared on social media feeds across the country. For Daniel, the attention was overwhelming. Strangers recognized him on the street. Old acquaintances reached out with congratulations. But with every new headline, the weight of his past pressed harder against him. It didn't take long for Jessica to resurface. One night, his phone buzzed with an Arizona number he didn't recognize. When he answered, the line was filled with sobs. "Daniel, it's me," Jessica's voice trembled. "Please don't hang up. I made a mistake." He froze. The same woman who had left him penniless and broken was now crying into his ear. "I shouldn't have gone," she continued. "I was scared. Everything was falling apart, and I thought I couldn't take it anymore. But I've been watching the news, and I see what's happened. Daniel, I miss you. I want to come home." Daniel's jaw tightened. He remembered the note she had left, the empty drawers, the missing money meant for his father's surgery. He remembered sitting in that apartment, wondering how to keep his dad alive. "You didn't just leave," he said, his tone cold. "You stole. You walked away when we needed you most." Her sobs grew louder. I know. I was wrong. But I love you. "We can fix this, Daniel. You don't have to go through this alone." What she didn't mention, what she didn't apologize for, was the boyfriend she had run off with. Daniel had learned enough through mutual acquaintances to know she hadn't gone to Phoenix alone. The calls didn't stop. Morning and night, Jessica dialed his number. Sometimes she begged. Sometimes she accused him of being heartless. On other occasions, her voice softened, dripping with false sweetness. "We could have the life we always dreamed of now. You mean no more worries." Daniel stopped answering, but the voicemails piled up. Each one was more desperate than the last. 2 weeks later, Jessica showed up in Detroit. She didn't come quietly. Holding the arm of her new boyfriend, a man dressed in flashy clothes with a smug grin, she walked straight into the lobby of Sterling Enterprises. The reporters outside captured the moment instantly, their cameras flashing as she announced to security that she was Daniel Thompson's wife. The footage made headlines within hours. Billionaire heir's estranged wife returns. Inside the building, Jessica demanded to see Daniel. She wore a tight dress and expensive jewelry, her eyes darting nervously between the guards who surrounded her. The boyfriend, clearly intoxicated by the attention, smirked and tried to push past the front desk. Security quickly intervened. "Mr. Thompson has given instructions. You are not permitted on these premises." Jessica's voice cracked, high-pitched and frantic. "He's my husband. He can't just ignore me. Tell him I'm here. Tell him I'm sorry." When Daniel was notified, he didn't rush down. He simply instructed the guards. "Escort them out. Make sure it's on record." Through the glass of his office, he could see her struggling as security led them back toward the street. Jessica's pleas turned to shouts, and her boyfriend pulled her close, whispering something in her ear that only made her yell louder. The cameras outside captured every second. That evening, the footage played across national television. Viewers saw Jessica pounding on the glass doors of Sterling Enterprises, her voice breaking as she screamed his name. Daniel watched from his office with a mixture of sadness and clarity. This was the woman he had once promised to build a life with. This was the woman who had chosen comfort over loyalty, who had walked away when there was nothing to gain, only to return once wealth was involved. Victoria found him standing silently at the window afterward. "Are you all right?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer at first. His eyes remained on the street below, where reporters were still gathered, the faint echoes of Jessica's voice drifting upward. "She showed me who she really was," he said finally. "Not when things were good, but when everything was falling apart. That's when people reveal themselves." He turned away from the glass, his decision final. "I don't hate her, but I'll never let her back into my life." For the first time since his inheritance had been revealed, Daniel felt a sense of control. The past had tried to reattach itself to him, to drag him backward. But now, standing in the center of an empire he had barely begun to understand, he knew where he stood. It wasn't Jessica's tears or promises that defined him anymore. It was his own choice. Robert's recovery was slower than the doctors had predicted, but it was steady. At first, he could barely move the fingers of his left hand. Weeks later, he lifted a cup of water on his own. Months after arriving at Mayo Clinic, he was walking short distances with only a cane for support. His speech, once tangled and halting, returned with clarity. Daniel sat beside him during therapy sessions, often overcome with gratitude. For years, Robert had sacrificed everything, working night shifts, skipping meals, wearing the same pair of boots until the soles gave out. Now, for the first time, Robert received care worthy of his effort. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about living again. "You know," Robert said one afternoon as he practiced sentences with his therapist, "I never thought I'd see this day. To talk to you clearly again, to walk without fear of falling. Son, you gave me this gift." Daniel shook his head. "No. Sterling's money did. Grandfather's empire paid for this." Robert reached for his hand, gripping it firmly. "Maybe. But you chose to use it for me. That's what matters. Money is only numbers until someone decides how to spend it." Those words echoed in Daniel's mind long after they returned to Detroit. Back in the Sterling offices, Victoria encouraged him to think about what came next. "You can manage the company as it is," she explained. "But if you want to shape your own legacy, you have to decide what matters most to you." Daniel didn't hesitate. He thought of the countless families in Detroit who lived paycheck to paycheck, of neighborhoods full of boarded-up houses and small businesses that never had a chance to grow. He remembered his own rejections at banks, the humiliation of being told he wasn't creditworthy. That was the seed of the Sterling Community Investment Fund. The idea was simple but bold. Create a resource that provided low-interest loans to struggling neighborhoods, targeting small business owners who were often overlooked by traditional banks. It wasn't charity, it was opportunity. "We'll back the dreamers who are told no," Daniel explained in the first board meeting. "If they have the drive, if they're willing to work, they deserve a chance. No one should be trapped in the same cycle I was." Some executives raised eyebrows. Others questioned the risk. But Daniel held firm. The company has enough wealth to absorb the losses if some ventures fail. What we can't afford is to keep ignoring the people who built this city with their labor. To strengthen the fund, he partnered with the University of Michigan's Business School and Wayne State University's Community Development Program. Students and professors would help evaluate proposals, blending academic insight with real-world needs. It wasn't just about loans. It was about mentorship, guidance, and creating a network where success was shared. The first official recipient of the fund was a young woman named Mariah Johnson from Flint. She was 23, bright, determined, and frustrated by constant rejections from banks. Her dream was modest but vital: a computer repair shop that also offered low-cost training for high school students. "I know what it's like to be told you don't qualify," Mariah said during her pitch. "But people in my neighborhood need this service. We can't afford to throw away laptops or phones every time they break. And if I can teach the next generation these skills, it's more than a business, it's a lifeline." Daniel listened intently. Her words reminded him of nights working at the warehouse, patching up old equipment with duct tape and stubbornness because buying new was never an option. When she finished, he smiled for the first time that day. "Mariah, you don't need to convince me. You've convinced yourself, and that's what counts. The Sterling Community Investment Fund will back you." The announcement drew applause in the boardroom, but it was Mariah's tears of relief that stayed with Daniel. Months later, he visited her shop on the north side of Flint. The windows were bright with hand-painted signs. Inside, shelves were lined with refurbished computers, and a group of teenagers crowded around workbenches, learning how to repair circuit boards. "This is just the start," Mariah told him proudly. "We've already fixed over 100 devices, and 3 of my students are applying for tech scholarships. None of this would have happened without the fund." Walking through the shop, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose deeper than money or status. For the first time since inheriting his fortune, he saw the wealth transforming lives beyond his own family. That night, as he returned to his home in Detroit, he thought of Robert's words again. Money is only numbers until someone decides how to spend it. Daniel knew he was finally deciding. News of Daniel Thompson's inheritance didn't stay in the confines of Sterling Enterprises. The Detroit Free Press ran a front-page feature titled "Local Man Inherits Billions, Chooses to Stay and Invest." The story emphasized that, unlike many heirs who relocate to coastal estates, Daniel remained in Detroit, committed to his father, his community, and the city that had shaped him. Readers were drawn not just to the numbers, but to the choices behind them. Photos of Daniel visiting Mariah Johnson's computer repair shop, speaking with students, and attending meetings with local business leaders accompanied quotes that emphasized purpose over profit. The narrative struck a chord. Here was a man who had been shaped by struggle, using wealth to create opportunity rather than escape. Back home, Daniel began renovating a historic property in Indian Village. The house was grand, but had been neglected for decades. He wanted it to feel like home, not a museum. The first-floor master suite was adapted to Robert's needs: wide doorways, non-slip flooring, a bathroom that accommodated his mobility. Upstairs, rooms were bright and open, a space Daniel intended for future family gatherings, mentorship programs, and occasional community events. While the renovation progressed, Daniel encountered a different kind of challenge: the people around him. Some old friends celebrated quietly, offering congratulations while sharing stories of mutual struggles. These relationships, built over years of shared hardship, proved resilient. They reminded Daniel of his roots and reinforced the values he wanted to maintain. Other connections, however, were more transactional. Distant relatives he had rarely seen suddenly appeared, requesting financial support or favors. Some friends from work reached out after years of silence, their motives veiled behind smiles and polite conversation. Even social media introduced opportunists. People who sent messages highlighting their connection to Daniel, hinting at how they could benefit from his new status. Each encounter was a lesson. Daniel learned to recognize intent quickly, distinguishing between those who valued him as a person and those drawn by wealth. It wasn't bitterness that guided him, but clarity. He could be generous without being exploited, involved without losing himself. Throughout this period, Victoria remained a constant presence. Her guidance went beyond business advice. She navigated him through corporate procedures, explained strategic decisions, and offered insight into the complexities of large-scale investments. More than that, she offered perspective on life and responsibility, blending professionalism with empathy. Their partnership began as purely functional, built on shared goals for sterling enterprises. Meetings evolved from financial updates to long discussions about community projects, educational initiatives, and ethical business practices. Over time, their trust deepened. Daniel came to rely on Victoria not only for her expertise, but for her understanding of the challenges he faced navigating sudden wealth and public attention. One evening, after a long day reviewing proposals for the Sterling Community Investment Fund, Victoria and Daniel walked through the nearly finished Indian village home. Robert was asleep in his new bedroom, and the quiet of the house offered a rare moment of reflection. "It's more than just money, isn't it?" Victoria said softly. "You're shaping more than your future. You're shaping the cities." Daniel nodded. "I never wanted this life for the sake of wealth alone. That would feel empty. What matters is how we use it, how many lives we can touch, how many opportunities we can create." Victoria smiled. "And you're learning fast. I've seen people inherit billions and lose themselves in it. You're different." Daniel looked around the home, imagining Robert moving freely, families visiting for community workshops, young entrepreneurs learning skills they never thought possible. He saw a city where opportunity wasn't reserved for a select few, where success could be shared and multiplied. "Your grandfather had the same vision," Victoria said, "but he never met the heir he hoped for. You're the one who can make it real." Her words resonated deeply. Daniel realized that responsibility wasn't just about managing an empire. It was about carrying forward a vision that combined wealth, empathy, and action. It was about transforming lives while remaining grounded in his own experiences. The contrast between old and new relationships became more pronounced. Neighbors from his warehouse days sent messages of encouragement and updates from their own lives. They celebrated quietly but sincerely, sharing their happiness in ways that money could never influence. Meanwhile, distant relatives continued to test boundaries, seeking loans, introductions, or favors. Daniel handled each with tact, offering assistance where it aligned with his values and declining where it didn't. Through it all, the Indian village home became a hub for connection. Students from Mariah's program came for tutoring sessions, neighborhood entrepreneurs attended planning workshops, and Sterling Enterprises staff met with community leaders to explore collaborative initiatives. The house, once silent and abandoned, now thrummed with purpose and energy. Victoria and Daniel's connection grew naturally within this environment. Shared responsibilities, long hours, and mutual respect fostered a partnership built on trust and alignment of values. There was no rush, no dramatic gestures, only a recognition of compatibility, shared goals, and a sense of solidarity in the face of complex challenges. By the end of the year, Daniel's public image had shifted. He was no longer just the man who inherited billions. He was seen as a leader invested in the city, a figure using his position to create tangible change. The media coverage reflected this. Articles highlighted his presence in Detroit neighborhoods, his support of local businesses, and his commitment to the Sterling Community Investment Fund. Yet Daniel measured success differently. Beyond headlines and social media praise, he valued the tangible progress he could observe. Repaired homes, thriving small businesses, empowered students, and his father walking without aid. Each success confirmed that his choices, grounded in responsibility and empathy, were making a meaningful difference. A year had passed since Daniel Thompson discovered he was the heir to the Sterling fortune. Detroit's skyline looked familiar, but subtly transformed to his eyes. Projects he had championed, the community fund, university partnerships, and neighborhood renovations, were taking shape, bringing tangible change to areas that had long been overlooked. Daniel often reflected on the distance he had traveled. A year ago, he was a warehouse worker balancing 12-hour shifts, caregiving for a recovering stroke patient, and scrambling to cover medical expenses. His world was defined by scarcity, uncertainty, and the constant weight of responsibility. Now, he navigated boardrooms, oversaw large-scale community initiatives, and made decisions that would ripple through entire neighborhoods. Yet the wealth he inherited felt secondary to the lessons it brought. Daniel understood that the true inheritance was the opportunity to make an impact, to create stability where there was none, to provide tools for others to rise above circumstances that once held them back. It was a power he had vowed to wield responsibly, mindful that money alone could not define success. He thought of his grandfather, Alexander Sterling. Despite his fortune, Alexander had died without reconciling with family, isolated by his pursuit of business triumphs. His empire had grown vast, yet he never saw the generation he had hoped to leave it to. Daniel realized that wealth without connection and purpose was hollow. He resolved to avoid repeating those mistakes. Robert's recovery remained a source of joy. Each morning, he walked into the living room, full of energy and curiosity, ready to discuss community projects, current events, or updates from the Sterling Community Investment Fund. His presence reminded Daniel that family and care were the foundations upon which meaningful work must be built. The Indian Village home had become a hub of activity. Workshops were held for local entrepreneurs, students gathered to learn new skills, and meetings with community leaders explored further initiatives. Daniel moved among these gatherings not as a distant benefactor, but as an active participant. He listened, advised, and celebrated progress. The wealth he commanded was a tool for empowerment rather than prestige. Victoria remained at his side. Their relationship had matured through shared challenges and triumphs, grounded in trust and mutual respect. While her initial role was professional guidance, it had evolved into a partnership that encompassed personal support, shared vision, and emotional connection. Together, they assessed proposals, prioritized projects, and envisioned long-term strategies that aligned with both business growth and community development. One afternoon, Daniel and Victoria reviewed potential projects for the next quarter. A proposal for a multi-use community center in a Detroit neighborhood long overlooked by investors had caught their attention. Daniel studied the plans, considered the logistics, and discussed potential outcomes with Victoria. "This will change lives," Victoria said quietly. "It will provide education, entrepreneurship, and a safe space for families. It's the kind of project that turns wealth into lasting impact." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. That's what this is all about. It's not the money itself. It's what we do with it, and how we ensure it reaches people who need it most." He reflected on his own journey, the years of hardship, the betrayal of someone he had loved, the despair of nearly losing his father, and the sudden inheritance that had changed everything. The experience had taught him lessons about human character, loyalty, and resilience. Those who had abandoned him during hardship revealed the limits of their concern. Those who stayed, offered genuine support, or collaborated in meaningful work became pillars of his new life. The contrast was clear in both personal and professional spheres. Opportunistic relatives, distant acquaintances, and social connections motivated by wealth had quickly faded. In their place were authentic relationships built on shared values and mutual respect. Daniel recognized that these relationships, not financial holdings, were the cornerstone of his legacy. Looking ahead, Daniel envisioned a network of initiatives extending beyond Detroit. The Sterling Community Investment Fund would expand to other cities in the Rust Belt, providing loans, mentorship, and education to neighborhoods historically overlooked. Partnerships with universities and nonprofits would continue to guide these efforts, creating a model where success was shared and impact was measurable. At the close of the year, Daniel stood on the balcony of the Indian Village home, watching the Detroit River reflect the evening sky. Robert, walking steadily nearby, smiled and waved. Victoria joined him, reviewing notes on a tablet and discussing strategic plans. "We've done a lot," Daniel said, almost to himself. "But there's so much more to do. I feel like this is only the beginning." Victoria looked at him. "It is. And you've built a foundation that lasts because it's based on values, not just numbers." Daniel understood. Alexander Sterling had left an empire, but without the connection to family and purpose, it had been a lonely fortune. Daniel had inherited not only wealth, but also an opportunity to create something enduring. A life that blended financial responsibility, community impact, and personal fulfillment. He glanced toward Robert, whose presence reminded him of the sacrifices that had made his journey possible. He glanced at Victoria, whose guidance had made the inheritance more than money, transforming it into vision and action. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel felt a profound sense of responsibility and hope. The empire he now controlled was a tool for positive change. Every decision, every investment, every initiative would reflect the lessons learned from hardship, loyalty, and perseverance. The greatest wealth, Daniel realized, was not in currency or property. It was in the lives touched, opportunities created, and communities uplifted. That understanding would guide him in every choice, every project, and every interaction for years to come. Standing beside Victoria, Daniel began outlining plans for the next community initiative, confident that the combination of resources, purpose, and vision could continue to transform lives. The year had shown him that legacy wasn't built in a single inheritance. It was built through consistent, meaningful action, guided by compassion and integrity. The journey from warehouse worker to billionaire heir had been extraordinary, but the real transformation was deeper. Daniel had grown into a leader capable of using wealth to make lasting change, ensuring that opportunity, not just money, defined the Sterling legacy. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. Subscribe now because tomorrow's story will blow your mind, and your support helps us continue bringing you these powerful, life-changing tales.